Good evening, spooky slumberer, and welcome. Tonight, you are invited to slow your thoughts, soften your breathing, and step quietly into a winter night when nothing asks anything of you except that you listen and rest. Beyond the noise of the day, beyond the lists and the worries and the glow of unfinished thoughts, there is a small town wrapped in snow, and on one of its lamplit streets stands a candle shop that has been keeping gentle watch for a very long time. This is a story about warmth held against the cold, about memory carried in small, steady flames, and about the quiet magic that lingers when people leave kindness behind without even knowing they've done so. Tonight you will visit a candlemaker on Christmas Eve who works slowly and carefully, surrounded by light, scent, and the soft company of winters past. There will be no rush, no sharp edges, no need to stay alert. Everything here unfolds at the pace of falling snow and cooling wax. As you listen, allow the story to carry you. You don't need to picture every detail or follow every thread. Simply let the words drift past like lamplight through frost, knowing that you're safe, warm, and gently guided toward sleep. Now, before the story begins, take a moment to get comfortable in your bed. Pull the blankets up a little higher against the cold, letting their weight settle reassuringly over you. Allow your shoulders to drop, your jaw to loosen, your hands to rest wherever they feel most at ease. Take a slow breath in through your nose and let it out gently through your mouth. Another breath in and out, a little slower this time. And one more, deep and easy, as though you are breathing in candlelight and breathing out the day. There is nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to do. Let the world grow quiet around you, and when you're ready, we'll begin. The Candlemaker on Christmas Eve. On the corner of Winter Lane, where the snow always seemed to fall in slow, thoughtful spirals, and the lamplight pooled on the cobblestones like poured honey, there stood a very small candle shop whose windows glowed so softly that on winter evenings it looked more like a lantern someone had forgotten to snuff than a building of brick and wood. The sign above the door read, "Bright Rill and Company Candleworks," though the "and Company" had long ago become merely a fond memory. The last of the company had passed many years before, and only Eleanor Brightrill remained, moving through the little shop with the quiet assurance of someone who has belonged to a place for a very long time. On this particular night, Christmas Eve, the sign creaked gently as the wind nudged it, and the snow, already piled on the window ledges like thick cream, muffled every sound outside and made the world seem very far away. Inside was another world entirely, warm with beeswax and spice, so different from the pale blue chill of the street that anyone crossing the threshold might feel as though they had stepped into another season altogether. The floorboards, rubbed smooth by years of footsteps, gave a little sigh with each movement Eleanor made, and the candlelight laid golden fingers along the shelves and jars and polished wood. There were candles everywhere, and yet never too many, for each one seemed to know its place. Tall ivory tapers stood in ranks like slender choir boys, bound in bundles with velvet ribbon. Short, stout pillar candles watch from the lower shelves with dependable, comforting faces. Glass jars held rich swirls of colour, honey gold, berry red, pine deep as forest shade, and the milky white of fresh snow, each capped with a neat metal lid and tied with cotton string. To one side of the front room, on a low wooden stool by the largest window, stood a Christmas tree, not tall or impressive in the grand sense, but round and generous and perfectly suited to its corner, as if it had grown up dreaming of living inside a candle shop. Its branches carried little beeswax ornaments pressed into shapes of stars, moons, tiny owls and doves, each one faintly scented with honey and sun. Strands of dried orange slices hung between them, thin enough that when the candlelight touched them, they glowed like small, captured sunsets. Few glass baubles nestled there, for Eleanor preferred simpler things, but the ones she had kept, clear globes hand-painted with white snowflake patterns, caught the light and multiplied it, so that the tree seemed to breathe with it. A hand-carved wooden star, slightly uneven at the edges, rested at the top, made long ago by her grandfather and polished by the years into something quietly precious. Garlands of greenery wound along the shelves, rosemary and bay, pine and a little sprig of holly here and there, twined with narrow ribbons the colour of winter berries. A wreath hung upon the door, its circle woven of evergreen branches and tiny beeswax flowers, their petals moulded to look like early spring blossoms. Whenever the door had opened that day, it had released a little puff of cold air mingled with the bright scent of pine and the deeper homely perfume of cloves and cinnamon sticks that rested in a bowl near the stove. But now the door was closed and bolted. The sky outside had deepened to absolute blue-black, and the shop belonged to its candles, its keeper, and the soft breathing of the fire in the little iron stove at the back. The heart of the candle shop lay beyond a narrow doorway where Eleanor kept her workshop. Here, the air grew warmer still and denser with fragrance. Blocks of beeswax sat stacked on a shelf like pale golden bricks, waiting their turn to be melted. Copper pots simmered quietly on the stove, each one holding wax slowly transforming from solid to liquid, thickening and gleaming as it went. The wooden table bore the marks of long use, small, hardened pools of wax like fallen moons, faint scorch marks, knife scrapes, and the worn circles where jars had stood to cool Christmas after Christmas. Lanterns hung from hooks overhead, their light overlapping in gentle circles that pooled around Eleanor's hands as she stirred the wax with the unhurried attentiveness of someone who knows precisely how long each step should take and sees no reason to hurry any of them. Along one wall of the workshop, rows of tiny glass bottles stood in neat formation on narrow shelves, each labelled in Eleanor's looping hand. Some names were straightforward: lavender, peppermint, orange peel. Others were more peculiar, little spells in ink. Old church pew, with its notes of polished wood and faint incense. First frost, cool and clear as a winter morning. Pudding and spice, which when uncorked released the ghost of every kitchen that had ever steamed with Christmas desserts. Snowmelt, soft and clean and faintly mineral, like water dripping from an icicle into the cupped hands of a child. Tonight, some of these small vials were already open, their contents waiting in measured drops to join the melted wax. All around them, the air shimmered with their mingled scents, ready to become stories pressed into wax and wick. On the shop counter in the front room, near the till and the little basket of hand-dipped tapers, sat a polished silver bell on a small circle of dark wood. It was not attached to the door, and no one ever touched it. It simply waited. Eleanor's grandmother had placed it there many years ago and told her, in a tone that was half joking and half very much not, that it would ring when visitors came whose feet did not use doorstep. In all the busy years of Eleanor's candle making, it had remained mostly quiet, yet on certain nights, always when the air was particularly crisp and the moon particularly watchful, it chimed seemingly on its own. As Eleanor stirred the beeswax for her Christmas Eve batch of candles poured only once a year, each one meant to hold a soft echo of the feelings of the season. The small silver bell chimed a tiny ringing that moved through the air, through her, and through the candle flames on the shelves, which all seemed to tremble in unison. She paused, hand resting lightly on the wooden spoon, and listened to the quiet that followed, a quiet so imposing that it was a presence in itself. A figure stood near the shelves of tall white tapers, not sharply outlined, but held together by intention, like mist that has decided very politely to arrange itself into the shape of a person. There was the impression of a high-lace collar, of gloved hands folded neatly, of hair coiled into a careful knot and fastened with a comb. A faint trail of rose water and starch floated around her. She moved along the row of candles with slow satisfaction, pausing where the non-drip labels sat, her presence leaving the wicks, trembling in her wake. Another presence glided in behind her, livelier, like a ripple of laughter passing through the air. The candles near the festive shelf, where the mulled wine blend and the holly and clove pillars sat, brightened as a second spirit hovered beside them. The outline of a waistcoat, the sense of a sweeping coat, the faintest impression of a hand outstretched in anticipation of greeting of guests, all gathered into being. The air around him carried the ghost of violin music, the swirl of winter dances, the scent of spiced punch and orange pomanders. Near the lavender and vanilla section drifted a softer figure, wrapped in the hush of bedtime stories and woolen blankets. The air where she passed warmed with chamomile and a hint of warm milk, and further along, by the shelf that held the writer's blends, candles scented with paper, ink, dust and a little cedar, something thinner, more fragile came into focus, like the outline of someone who had spent a great deal of time leaning over a desk, forgetting the world outside because the words would not let them go. All of them gathered in the shop as though returning home after a long voyage. They touched nothing. Their hands, where they had hands, hovered a fraction above the surfaces, passing through ribbon and glass without moving either, yet the objects responded all the same. A bow quivered, a bauble rang faintly, a garland leaf dipped as if in greeting. The Christmas tree, with its beeswax ornament and orange sliced suns, shimmered as the spirits drew near, its little glass baubles catching not only the candlelight, but reflections of outlines that did not appear on the glass. Eleanor did not need to step through from the workshop to know who they were. She recognized them by the way the air felt around them, and by the scents that rose up in response. The exact blend of rose lavenders she had made one winter for a lady who feared wax drips on her tablecloth. The precise mulled wine and cranberry candle favoured by a man who claimed an evening was only truly festive if one could barely find the ceiling through all the greenery and light. The lavender jar that had once sat in a nursery on a high shelf where little hands could never quite reach. The ink and paper blend she had sold to a young poet who had saved for weeks to afford it. They were her customers from years gone by, returning by candlelight to offer a Christmas greeting. They drifted, one by one, toward the workshop, drawn by the slower, thicker scents of melted beeswax and opened bottles. The lanterns overhead cast their forms in soft halos, not so much lighting them as acknowledging their presence. Eleanora, standing by the stove, felt the room fill up around her, not with bodies, but with the weightless fullness of attention. It was as though the years themselves had decided to stand in a circle and join her in the joy of candle making on Christmas Eve. On the table she had already set out what she would need for her most special candle of the night. There was a wide glass jar with thick, clear sides and a slightly flared rim, a cotton wick already fixed in its centre and anchored at the base. There were bottles and herbs, leaves and peels, a small cut of dried pine needles from the very tree that watched over the front room, and a twist of ribbon she might tie later around the jar's neck. She had been thinking, in an idle way, of what candle she would be making for herself this year, not for sale, but just for her. She had not yet settled on its fragrance. Now, with all these quiet witnesses around her, it seemed the decision had already been made somewhere above her head. She took up the spoon again and stirred the beeswax. Into the liquid gold she dropped measured oils, rose and lavender, recalling calm parlours and smooth linen, chamomile, honey, and a soft vanilla, carrying distant echoes of rocking chairs and sleepy murmurs, orange, cinnamon, clove, and a dark, rich note of something like warm wine, bringing in the tumble and cheer of crowded winter tables, cedarwood, paper, and the crisp mineral coolness of the snowmelt blend, drawing in the solitary comfort of a desk, a blank page, and the sense that words might arrive if one only sat long enough in the light. With each addition the air changed, deepened, layered itself into something more than festive, more than pretty. It became reminiscent rather than specific, a mingling of scents that no longer belonged to any single moment, but to many memories at once. Something intangible and familiar, like the feeling of remembering without quite knowing what it is you remember. The ghosts brightened as she worked, their edges a little clearer, their presence a little stronger, as if each remembered fragrance gave them weight. When the wax was ready, smooth, fragrant, free of bubbles, Eleanora lifted the pot and poured, slowly and steadily, into the waiting jar. The melted wax flowed around the wick, filling the glass with marbled swirls of colour, streaks of pale gold and berry red, lavender silver and evergreen, blending and separating like memories overlapping. For a little while the surface stayed in motion, reflecting lantern light in fleeting patterns that were here and gone in the space of a breath. Then it began to still, to thicken, to set. The spirits gathered closer, forming a pale ring around the work table. They bent toward the jar, some with something like solemnity, some with soft delight. The air hummed with quiet, and the only sound was the small tick and sigh of the cooling wax as it settled into its final shape. Time moved differently in that room for a while. The clock in the front shop went on ticking, the fire went on breathing, the snow went on falling in world beyond the frosted glass. But at the heart of the candle shop, everything seemed suspended around the little jar on the table and what it held. A lifetime winters of kindness, a lifetime of hands lighting candles in kitchens and parlours and bedrooms and at rough wooden desks, a lifetime of seasons of people stepping in from the cold, choosing something bright to take away with them, and in doing so, leaving behind an invisible imprint that had finally, on this night, taken the shape of its own flame to be. When the surface finally cooled to a soft, matte sheen, the wick stood straight and ready, its end pale against the creamy wax. The ghosts seemed to sigh, though no sound passed through the room. One by one, their forms grew softer again, the details blurring like ink in water. The scents that had risen so vividly from their memories began to flow back into the candle, as though drawn gently home. The first spirit, the one scented with rosewater and starch, drifted backwards until she was only a suggestion of lace and posture, and then only the faintest hint of rose in the air. The cheerful host thinned to a ripple of warmth and vanished like laughter when the doors are closed and the party is long finished. The governess melted into a feeling of being tucked in, and the writer into the sense of a final sentence completed at last. By the time Eleanor lifted the cooled candle from the table and cupped it in both hands, she was alone again, but the solitude felt changed, richer. The shop behind her was just as it had been. Garlands hanging, tree watching the window, wreath guarding the door, shelves crowded with colours and shapes of light waiting to be freed. The silver bell sat quiet and still on its little wooden disc. And yet the silence had a different quality now, like a room that has just heard a piece of very good news and is still holding the echo of it. She carried the candle into the front room and set it on the small table beside her favourite chair, the one beneath the window and closest to the tree. Outside, the sky had begun to bleach from deep blue-black to a softer indigo, and the snow on the rooftops of the town had taken on the faintest blush of approaching dawn. A distant church bell tolled the late hour, the notes drifting across the valley like slow silver snowflakes. Eleanor wrapped her quilt around her shoulders, its patchwork of old fabrics, a history of winters stitched into colour, and struck a single match. For a moment the sulphur flared sharp, then softened into a small, determined flame. She held it to the wick of the new candle, and the wax accepted it at once. The flame blossomed up, not violently, but with a steady, confident rise, as if it had been waiting a long time for exactly this moment. It settled into a quiet, upright burn, a clear spear of light with a heart of blue and edges of steady gold. The scent that rose was all the things she had poured into it, and something more besides. The rose and lavender of parlours with holly in the vases, the spice of Christmas puddings and oranges studded with clove, the clean comfort of nurseries lit by night lights, the thoughtful hush of desks scattered with pages, the green breath of pine boughs and rosemary garlands, the sweetness of beeswax and dried orange slices glowing on a little tree. It wrapped around her like a shawl made of all the winters she had lived, and all the winters she had quietly illuminated for other people. The Christmas tree stood beside her, branches still and dignified, beeswax stars mellow and rich in the candle's glow, orange slices lit from behind until they looked like thin, glowing embers. The glass baubles caught the light and threw it in small, gentle sparks against the garlands, the wreath, the shelves. The whole shop seemed to soften, as if the walls had allowed themselves to lean in closer to the heart of the place. Eleanor's eyes grew heavy as she watched. She could feel, in the quiet way one feels the presence of a cat on the bed, or an old friend in the next room, that she was not truly alone, not on this night, and perhaps not ever, not while candles burned in windows she had once helped to fill. A deep, unhurried contentment settled over her, heavier than her quilt and far lighter than any burden, and she let it hold her as her breathing slowed and her thoughts drifted. As she slipped into sleep, the candle's flame remained clear and unwavering, guarding the boundary between night and morning. Outside, the sky paled pearl, and somewhere in the town a child woke to Christmas and the promise of surprises. Inside the little shop on Winter Lane, the Candlemaker slept in her chair beneath the gentle watch of her tree and her work, and all the quiet gratitude folded into the light, while the Christmas Eve candle burned on, a small steadfast star at the centre of its own tender universe. Good night, spooky slumberer, and don't let the bedbugs bite.